Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Michelle Barmazel, and I am the parent of Beck Steinberg from the class of 2020. And on behalf of the Gann Alumni Parent Association, or GAPA, it is my pleasure, along with my co-chairs, fellow alums, alum parents Judith Sidney and Ron Eichen, to welcome you to this inaugural event. Before we start, I just want to make sure everybody could please mute themselves. And I think we're good. Tonight we are so lucky to be joined by two amazing leaders of Gann Academy, Dr. Dalia Hochman and Rabbi Marc Baker, and it is a chance for us to hear the stories behind the story. After our discussion, Ron's going to close us off, and then we will leave the Zoom room open so people can stay and schmooze for a while, so feel free to stick around if you like. GAPA was formed to keep alive this wonderful Gann community and the friends that we as parents made during our time that our kids were here at Gann. Great Conversations offers up a space to connect and hear from stories about our wonderful community. Moderating for us tonight will be Scott Cohen, our immediate past president of the Board of Trustees, who's worked closely with both Dalia and Marc, and we're so excited that he will be facilitating this evening. We have been planning this for a little while, so we're really glad to see that so many of you decided to join us tonight. Thank you so much. Scott?
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks to the Gann Alumni Parent Association for pulling this together, and to all of you for joining us. As Michelle said, I'm Scott Cohen, and in addition to being a parent of two Gann graduates and a current senior, I had the unique pleasure of serving as board president or president-elect under actually three Gann heads of school. Rabbi Marc Baker, our interim head, Dr. Jerry Katz, and of course, our current incredible head of school, Dr. Dalia Hochman. So we're gonna jump in. And if you have questions, please pose them directly to me using the chat function, and we'll try to get those answered during the course of the next, 55 minutes or so that we're together. I feel like I have to kind of quickly introduce our two contestants, even though you all obviously know who they all are. So forgive my brevity. Obviously, Rabbi Baker is the CEO of Boston's Jewish Federation Combined Jewish Philanthropies, and previously spent a decade at Gann Academy as head of school. And Dr. Dalia Hochman is our current head of school. She was previously with Summit Learning, which is the kind of high-profile Silicon Valley charter network funded by Chan Zuckerberg. She's led the transformation of a Rhode Island public high school. She ran the innovation unit for the Los Angeles Unified School District. She served as a visiting assistant professor of education at Vassar, but she's probably best known for teaching at the LaGuardia High School for Music and Performing Arts, also known as the school in the movie, from the movie Fame. So welcome to both of you, and let's get started. So this session was billed as getting to the stories behind the stories. So I think many of my questions, I think, are going to push Dr. Hochman and Rabbi Baker in that direction. And please, again, add yours to the chat. So Dr. Hochman, or Doc Hoch, as the students call you, maybe let's start at the beginning. Bring us inside the search process that brought you to Gann, and maybe give us a story that gave you a sense that something was different about Gann Academy.
Thanks so much, Scott, and welcome everyone. I'm welcoming you virtually to Gann Academy. Before I answer your question, Scott, I have to thank all of the organizers of tonight's event. To our GAPA, Gann Alumni Parent Organizers, thank you so much for getting together this year and coming up with this idea and just enriching our community, even as you celebrate the sort of future successes of your children. To our amazing advancement team, Trina and team, for continuing to just dazzle us with your creativity. And to the entire Gann faculty and staff, because behind the leadership is an amazing group of people who are really working every day. A special thank you to Scott Cohen for moderating, and a special thank you to Rabbi Baker. We actually pre-gamed this, just so everyone knows, on Sunday morning, and we chatted about it, and we had such a nice conversation. And I got off the phone with you, Marc, and I said, like, man, he's so awesome. I wish we could have worked together, but that's not how these things go. So I'm so glad to benefit from your wisdom, and you're always a phone call away. And the past 2 years, man, I've really needed that. So thank you so much for all your support. Okay, the stories behind the story, right, Scott? That's where we're going? Okay. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how after I accepted the position and I knew I was coming to Gann and moving to Boston, I decided that I really needed to learn everything I could about this school, like everything. It was a big research project. So I met with as many students and teachers and staff members and parents and alumni parents and colleagues as possible. I couldn't get enough of it. But I have to say the group that sort of made the biggest impression on me, the group of stakeholders, were the alumni. Everywhere I went in Washington, DC and elsewhere, in Boston, I just so enjoyed meeting with New Jew and Gann alumni. So one night, it was a cold winter night in Manhattan. I happened to be visiting the Heschel School for the day, and I decided to do an all call to invite every New Jew and Gann Academy alum living in New York City to come meet me at a kosher wine bar on the Upper West Side. And I thought, should be fun. You know, these are really awesome people in their 20s and 30s. Very low key, casual evening, we'll hang out. And so I got there, and there was a group of alumni all ready for me. They were early. And they were sitting there, and one young woman stood up very straight and took out a printed list of questions, like essentially interview questions that she had prepared to grill me, and proceeded to grill me about my theories on Jewish education, my beliefs on pluralism, on Israel. She wouldn't let me stop, and they were all piping in. And, you know, boy, was I wrong. That was not a casual evening. They wanted to know essentially who was I to lead their school. And I think in some ways, this story really exemplifies the Gann spirit and the sort of what makes Gann unique on so many levels. I mean, I think most of us could not tell you the name of our high school principal today. We're just not, it's not that meaningful for us. But our students, for many of them, for most of them, this was the most transformative experience of their lives. And they own this place, and this is their school, and they want to know who's going to be their new leader. And they're going to grill that person, and they're going to do it with respect, and they're going to be menschy, but they want to know this is their school. And so I think that story and that moment for me was the best introduction to what makes this school so special. And since I've arrived, I can tell you that's exactly what I found.
Love that. Love that, and no surprise. Hey, just a reminder to everyone that you can pose questions to both Mark and Dalia during the course of tonight. So please do. I've already gotten some sent through the chat. Just put them in the chat directly to me, and we'll get them asked. And by the way, I'm not going to ask the same question to each person because I want to kind of move this along. But if you want us to rewind, just put it in the chat. So Rabbi Baker, I'd love to kind of continue Dalia's thread. You know, you became the head of school after what you and I have referred to as like the startup years under Rabbi Danny Lehman and his incredible visionary leadership. Like, what was the school like back then?
Thanks, Scott. First of all, and I'll just do my quick thank yous and say, I'm here, you know, still in love with Gann Academy, but also as a parent of 3 Gann students, for those that did not know. The only consolation I have, Dalia, that we're not working together is that thank God you are running the school while my kids are attending it. And especially over this past year, I'm just like, I think the work of running the school during COVID has been heroic. And I think I speak for the entire parent body at Gann across this community. We're just like forever indebted, and it's been like extraordinary. So, and I don't know, it's just incredible. Thank you. Thanks as a parent. And thank you to the board members and everyone who continues to keep this school strong. And I just want to say, Scott, since you asked me to go back in time, that one of the things I love about this school is if you look around this Zoom, there are founders, teachers, like I think there's 3 generations of Gann around this Zoom, and we're only what, like 26 years old, 25 years old. And that's one of the things that I love about the school. You can always see an intergenerational crowd because the spirit lives on and people keep coming back, and it changes and evolves, but you know, the love is there, and it's just so awesome to see so many faces. And many of you probably could tell more stories about the early years than I can, but So a reminder that I took over for the founding head 10 years after he started, but I also was there in year 2 as the, when that was my first job, helping to kind of see the school when it really started, the real startup days. So I'm going to kind of answer from the really early days of the school. And I think the nicest way to describe the culture would be spontaneous, which is like a nice word for chaotic. And I think I'm seeing some laughs. This school started without a building. I mean, it was a dream. And Danny Lehman, God love him, I don't think he's on this call, but I don't know that I could have convinced parents, Jewish parents from the greater Boston area, to send their kids to a school that didn't exist yet. And what happened is, because of that, the school was built, I think, on a couple of things. Number one was an incredibly mission-driven school. You said it, Dalia, pluralism, a vision of 21st century education, like this is going to pave the way, and everything the school did was around that vision. And then pioneers, like a pioneering spirit, not just the head, the teachers, the students, the faculty. And part of that pioneering spirit meant, like, we will seize any moment we find to do whatever seems educationally sound. So, a great speaker comes into town, we'll cancel classes. We got it, because that's a moment not to be missed. The students used to tease us that, like, any Israeli politician that like walked by the school, we would cancel classes and we bring them in to speak. I heard rumors that when we were building the campus on Forest Street, that periodically Danny Lehman would just like kind of cancel classes and take the entire school from the other building to walk over to kind of see it, which is like, I think that was part of the kind of like vision-driven pioneering spirit of like, we're in for something big. I will tell you one time back on Turner, on the street, on Main Street in Prospect in downtown Waltham, one day a student, we used to walk to the park sometimes for lunch down the street. We had no campus. One day I see a student walk out of the building with a grill, a portable grill. And I said, what are you doing? He's like, we're grilling for lunch at the park. I said, you're not grilling for lunch at the park. He said, I'm grilling. That one, to be honest, I'm not sure that one ended well, but because even there were some boundaries around the spontaneity, but I think it speaks to actually this notion of a kind of just incredibly entrepreneurial spirit that runs through the students, the teachers. And I mean, you could point to some of the most incredible things that started and have continued at Gann that were really like this sense of kind of nothing's going to stand in our way from kind of making moments, creating an educational opportunity. And that led to students and teachers, I think, who were real builders. And that led to clubs, and that led to programs, and that led to so many things that other people would have said, there's no way that could happen. But that, I think, was the innovative spirit at Gann, and I think it continues to be one of the kind of defining features of the school.
Love that. Thank you. Hey, Dalia, like, a lot has changed since the early days that Mark just was talking about. And you had the unique challenge of managing through a pandemic. So, like, take us kind of behind the scenes a little bit from at least, I don't know, maybe one story from this year.
Sure. I'll share with everyone an inside joke. For the past week or two, we've been talking about this event, and it's been sort of like dark humor. We've been like, oh, talk about COVID, just make it light, make it funny. That's been sort of, what do you want me to do on February 9th? Talk about COVID. Make it funny though, Dalia, make it funny, So I joked about this with Mark because sadly it hasn't been that funny, but there have in the past, year or so, I think for any of us, it's been really hard. But I think, there are some moments now that I can look to and really reflect on and sort of see even some humor, a little bit of humor. So I'll tell you one story that's a tiny bit funny. You'll let me know if it's really funny, Scott and Mark. So, this past summer, as many of you know, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if we could go back in school in person. But around July 4th weekend, we got word from the state that we would be allowed to do it. So we decided to go for it. I mean, it was sort of like a crazy, bold move. We're like, we're going to do this. We're going to reopen in person full time. None of this hybrid, none of that. No, we're going to do this. We're bringing everyone back. Everyone's coming. And essentially for 6 weeks, we had to recreate the school. And I'm talking every piece of the school. We had to reroute buses, redo lunch, redo the schedule. And that's a big deal for a high school. And frankly, that's why so many high schools have not opened, is because the high school schedule is so complex. We had to, teachers who were planning to teach, they had to redo their classes. And I give everyone so much credit for doing that in the middle of the pandemic. We had to redo volleyball. How do you do volleyball? Well, we had gloves, right? And like every little detail we had to rethink, and we had to rewrite the handbooks, you know, the Gann dress code, we had to rewrite to include masks. And it was just a crazy 6 weeks experience where everyone was just, you know, burning the candle on both ends and working so hard. In the very last moment, we were almost there. We decided that we were going to open early. And I think we might have been, if not the first, one of the first high schools in Massachusetts to reopen. And we're really proud of that. And we made the decision to reopen early because in August, the weather is good. So we decided to start only outdoors. So we thought a good way to bring everyone back was to have an outdoor program. And we thought this was so smart given our beautiful campus. But lo and behold, the night before or the day before, we looked at our weather report and it was like going to be really hot and humid. It was essentially the hottest day this summer was our day that was scheduled, and everyone got cold feet. Oh, warm feet, you know? I mean, it was sort of like so silly, all these barriers and all these problems that we had solved. And we just didn't know how we were going to have 300 kids essentially outside in the heat from 9 to 3 or whatever it was. And so I called, and this is where the Gann parents come in, because you guys are mighty. I have to tell you, beware of Gann parents. I called a Gann parent who's really a mover and shaker. And I said, listen, we have a problem. We have a full day out in the sun, no shade. What can we do? People are getting nervous. They're worried. We don't want to, it's not going to be a good look for Gann if we postpone because of heat in a global pandemic, you know? And she said, no worry, I gotcha. And so she called, she deployed all these Gann parents. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but somehow she deployed all these Gann parents to call every Costco in Eastern Massachusetts to order sun umbrellas for the kids and the teachers. And she like essentially bought out the inventory for the entire eastern half of Massachusetts in Costco. Then she deployed all these other parents. She was like behind the scenes managing all the deployment of parents who were going from Costco to Costco all over Boston to pick up said inventory of umbrellas. This is the day before school started for the 2020-2021 school year. And somehow they were magically dropped off. And as you might all imagine, the story ends well. The kids were fine. They had a blast. Our board chair, William Foster, who's amazing, bought popsicles for every child himself. He personally delivered popsicles for every kid and every teacher. And it was a fun day. It was hot, but the kids were thrilled to be outside of their bedrooms, off of Zoom and outside. And it was a really big, successful launch. And so for a while, we had like 200, 150 really awkward sun umbrellas everywhere. And, you know, we put them away for the winter, but just this week I was downstairs in the lower level again, and I happened upon these umbrellas, and they're in storage now. And I don't know, I think they're Ganns for posterity. I mean, we got lots of sun umbrellas. And I was just sort of like, I stopped and I lingered and I looked at those sun umbrellas and I thought, wow, like those umbrellas represent the fear and the uncertainty, and in some ways like the irrationality of this experience, but also really represent the best of this community of how we just figure it out, get together, come together, parents, teachers, we do this for our kids, we make it work, we eat popsicles. So I saw those umbrellas and I thought I would share that story with you because, you know, there was a lot of highs and lows this year, but that was a moment that I think represents a lot of how we've been able to pull this off. And I'm really proud, I'm gonna brag. We have been continuously in person since that day. We've had one quarantine or two, but our school has been open since August 21st, continuously for all kids, providing a much needed place and home and social experience for our kids. So I think, and we have a lot of umbrellas.
That's amazing. I do remember that. They were technically golf umbrellas, right?
Golf umbrellas, yeah.
Love that, love it. Hey.
So if you're looking for a golf umbrella in the Boston area, you're out of luck.
So while we're on the topic of golf umbrellas, Mark, I've gotten 3 questions here that have been submitted about sports at Gann. And so we all know that, you know, athletics and team sports have played a very important role in your life. right? Star squash player at Yale. Your ping pong prowess at Gann was legendary. And obviously you started, one of your roles at Gann in the early days was, athletic director. So give us a sports related kind of memory or highlight from your days at Gann.
So there are so many. That first year when I was the athletic director, and thank you for getting my title right, because my college roommates continued to insist that I was the gym teacher. So I have to remind them, excuse me, I was the athletic director. But what was cool about being the athletic director in the early years of the school was that I was like the athletic director in about 5 other roles because it was an early school. So in that year, we had a handful of sports already. The school was committed from the very beginning to really be kind of the best of both worlds, and to say, like, there's no way we are going to attract kind of talented, motivated, diverse kids from this community to a Jewish high school if we don't have like the best of sports and the best of arts. Like, it can't be an either or. And so we had a pretty good basketball team in those early days. Some of you will remember. And the second year, the year that I was the athletic director, we were invited to Toronto to an international North American basketball tournament at the Community Hebrew Academy of Toronto. And this is more a whole experience story than the sports story. I will say the next year, the team went and actually won the tournament. So it took us 1 year. The school was 1 year old. And by like the third year of the school, we won this tournament with schools, kind of community schools that have been around for a very long time, which I just think also speaks to, the drive, the talent of that student body. But traveling with kids is amazing. It's something that I think has been part of the Gann kind of like gestalt from the beginning. So I was the athletic director, but I wasn't the basketball coach, unfortunately, but I got to go on the trip as the religious advisor. So in this particular one, I appointed myself as athletic director, the religious advisor for this trip. And it was a Shabbat in Toronto. And so we were staying in people's homes and we had to like walk to the synagogue on Shabbat. And I remember, the sports part was incredible and fun. And our kids were kind of playing at the highest level of varsity sports with these schools from all over, kind of making a splash on the scene. But what I remember most actually was the Shabbat experience. We watched the culture of the other schools. And some of the other schools were very old schools that I would say were not exactly like 21st century Jewish schools. And like, I'm sorry to say this, but like watching their religious advisors yell at their kids and like, having to like take them out of a synagogue by the collar, it was painful to watch. And I actually realized at that moment, like the beauty and the power of our pluralism, because our kids, not all of our kids kind of went to the kind of synagogue we went to, but like, I think our kids had a real powerful sense of like, we're creating an environment here where like they get to choose, they get to construct, they get to make Judaism, kind of the meaningful role in their lives that it will be. It also means when they go to a Shabbat experience with kids from all over the country, they can participate and engage in the respectful ways that they're supposed to. But more importantly, I think they came to understand like the beauty of the kind of freedom and kind of almost individuality that they had, again, to kind of like pave their Jewish paths. And for me, the kind of intersection of a Shabbat on a basketball tournament was like, for me, it was like, that was it. Like it was Dayenu, that was enough for me. It was the coming together of all of my worlds, having, played a college sport, and been on my Jewish journey and really, really believing that like our kids should not have to choose between those two identities. Not to mention the fact that for another time, I think, the Jewish and the athletic ethos, intertwined so beautifully. But it was an awesome, awesome experience. And I think it does speak to the way that the school brings together so many different areas of kind of human passion and human experience and allows our kids to integrate them in a totally organic, holistic way that I really feel like shapes the lens through which they see the world, for the rest of their lives.
Great. It's a beautiful story. Dalia, Mark before talked about kind of the importance of kind of innovation in the Gann culture. You've had to kind of innovate on the fly this year to keep our students safe and healthy. I know that one innovation specifically was the drive-in graduation for the class of 2020. I've got 2 questions from participants about that graduation. Give us a backstory. How did that get put together?
Sure. Well, let's see if we have how many 2020 class parents we have. Raise your hand. All right, you're a mighty group. We'll take a moment to collectively appreciate this group. It's not easy to be a parent of a senior last spring. It's probably not easy to be a parent, period. I know that. But, you know, sometimes I think, and then this is wearing my parent hat, I sometimes wonder about how we feel loss on behalf of our children, you know, and I think about sometimes it's like this interesting cycle where we project the loss that we feel on them, and is it really a loss? And last spring, I think especially for high school seniors, that was going on in terms of this was supposed to be their big moment and their big spring, and they had so much that they were excited about. And our team went back and forth on this, like, is it our projecting our sadness for them? Are they really sad? And ultimately, we decided like our community needed something. It wasn't only because, you know, our kids are going to be okay. They're very, in some ways, they have so much privilege, so much opportunity, but our community needed something. And that's where we made the decision to do it. You know, it wasn't entirely about, I mean, you know, there was a lot of loss for them, but for the teachers, for the staff, for the parents, for the grandparents, this was a moment for our community that we needed a ritual, we needed a milestone. And I think in some ways it's a very Jewish approach to mark time with some sort of ritual. The American graduation with all its pomp and circumstance, it's probably very not Jewish, but it's very Jewish to say, we need something, we need a simcha. We needed a simcha last spring. And we have an amazing development advancement team again. And together with all the deans and the senior teachers, I mean, this was like a huge group effort with subcommittees and subcommittees. I like lost track of all the emails at some point. It was just, and so, you know, we're like, what can we do to really, really just mark this milestone, not only in the kids' lives and their families' lives. And so we researched all of our options, and turns out there is a drive-through movie theater in Mendon, Massachusetts. And we were like on the waiting list to do that. And we were envisioning Go Grease Lightning, poodle skirts. That was our theme, 1950s. Then we realized like the kids are way too young to have any clue why that's cool. We thought that was cool, like a drive-in, roller skates, teachers on roller skates and masks. So that idea was sort of ditched. But the notion of a drive-in, like we really, really wanted to make it work. And there were so many details, but ultimately the kids really they were able to wear their caps and gowns. They were able to have a processional. They were able to flip the tassel. We had student speakers. I mean, it just, you know, the lesson for me on a lot of this is actually leadership and success. It's not like some secret infectious disease, epidemiological answer. It's just like good, practical, hard work and thinking through a problem. That's what a lot of this leadership was. You know, we had our medical advisors at every corner advising us, but we were thinking like, what will work? What does our community need? What do our kids need? What do our teachers need to sort of signify the end of this very hard year? So in some ways I take away from that very successful graduation, which was like so uplifting. I think it was the first moment in June that anyone had gotten dressed up and gone out anywhere. I mean, I think it was June 2020, and sort of where had we been? And here we were driving to Gann. And I think the most poignant moment for me, because I had been at the previous graduation in 2019, and I think the most meaningful part of Gann graduation is when the teachers line up to escort the new graduates out of Forest Street. And I think that's like really meaningful because it's really the teachers who escorted everyone in. It's really the teachers who escorted everyone out. But this year we did it. We lined up outside in our masks, and I'll never forget the teachers 6 feet apart in their masks, waving at our kids, you know, because we never really got to have the full goodbye. But I think our 2020 graduates will actually remember that graduation and that moment in so many different ways than other graduates. So I think ultimately it was a success. But I do, upon reflection, all of these innovations, the umbrellas, the graduation, how we do volleyball again, or everything, there's a million details. I think innovation in general and trying to figure out what works and just doing it, just like really good people working really hard together, aligned, and being fearless. I think there's a fearlessness to what we did, because there were so many times when we could have said that this will never work. And there were so many people who said, this is not going to be safe. This is not this. There's like, we had a joke, like, let's have getting to yes, not getting to no, you know? And if you have this sort of getting to yes and like fearlessness of just doing it, anything is possible. So I think that's sort of my takeaway from all of the zillion of innovations. I have to say, I was joking with a teacher yesterday. I will be so glad to do the same thing again 2 years in a row, because it gets exhausting to do everything differently this year. And I think all of us experience that in our professional lives. It's not just in education. But so there's an exhaustion that you have to sort of contend with and be empathetic towards. But I think there's also just a fearlessness of like, let's just do this,
For sure, that's great. So Mark, like obviously you never had to manage the school through a pandemic, Baruch Hashem. But you did see the school through some pretty significant, if not radical changes. But the mission and like the essence of the school that you talked about are so timeless. Like, give us an example of something that changed but remained the same. Something that changed but like retained the mission and the spirit of Gann during your tenure.
Oh gosh, Scott, asking a leader about like a time they led change, it's like I got to get over my like PTSD from the experience, because I think you all know, first of all, schools are like tribes. That's what makes them so special. And the more people on this screen that have been attached to this school for the more years, which is amazing, the harder it is to change, honestly, almost anything. And what's amazing about Gann is that it has this innovative spirit, but also this like deep sense of, I think, history and continuity. I think that's actually something magical about the place. And so I'm not going to lie, like it is really hard to change stuff in schools. And especially with students, the stories the kids will tell you, like that just like, there's just a deep resistance because kids who are only in that school for 4 years or their siblings, when it's like, I want it the way it was for my sibling. There's just a continuity bias. And then you make it a Jewish school. We have a 3,000-year continuity bias. So anyway, I'm going to talk about Israel for a few minutes, which like, if there's anyone that, still is mad at me for changing the Israel program, like this is your trigger warning, this is the moment. William Foster taught me a concept years ago about strategy. He said, it's not a strategic decision unless there's a non-idiotic alternative, right? Meaning it's easy to improve things when everyone knows they stink. Just make it better. What's really hard is making decisions when there's actually like two equally compelling ways you could go. Right? I mean, our Jewish tradition would call this a machloket l'shem shamayim, a debate for the sake of heaven. It will never go away. So when I got to Gann, my second time around, we were doing an Israel program for juniors that was 3 months in Israel, and half the class went. And it was a life-changing experience for the people that went. And I would say for many of the people who didn't go, the missing out on the life-changing experience was life-changing, but in other ways. And it was transformative for the group who was there, like in terms of group formation, and half the class didn't experience that. And it was like an awesome program in a lot of ways. And in other ways, like kind of just like almost a non sequitur from the Gann experience. Like you would hear kids talk about that as the highlight of their trip, but it was like almost out of context of Gann. So we like outsourced the most transformational experience of kids' lives. I hope you can hear in this the value conflicts, right? Like, and so I gotta be honest, like I think I knew that needed to change from like the time I got there. And it only took me like 7 years. I'm embarrassed to say that because so many people were so attached to it. And it was like really hard. I mean, it was like a landmine in some ways. And I was joking, but not entirely joking. Like if you were on this call and you were one of those people who thinks that was the worst decision I ever made, like you still feel it. But I feel really proud that like finally through a whole bunch of processes, we decided like what's the essence of this is not that program. The essence of this is the school is deeply committed to our students having a deep and lasting relationship with Israel. The school believes that if at all possible, giving them an immersive experience in Israel is the most powerful way to do that. We also believe that if they can do it as a class, there's nothing more transformational than that is possible. And by the way, we're also committed to the kind of like rigorous, intellectual, sophisticated Israel education that you really don't find much in American Jewish education. That's for another conversation. And so what we did is like, we kind of took those principles and we said, like, what would it look like to do this differently and do it in a way that holds on to the essence of a kind of transformational Israel experience, but actually makes it even more aligned with what we're trying to achieve. I wouldn't just say we held on to the essence. I would say we transformed that experience into something that like wasn't necessarily the exact same thing. And I know people missed it, but I think we created something that was much more integrated into the Gann experience, that was much more aligned with our educational vision, that made, I mean, I said, I think we can get almost every kid to go. I'll be thrilled with 90% of the class. And I think we like had all but a couple. I mean, it was really like, it was incredible. And by the way, it was bumpy that first year. Scott, I think your daughter was on it. We had a lot of conversations from Israel, but those kids came back telling the same stories as the kids who had been on the other program came back, saying the same thing about how transformational it was. And one last thing, which is we, as part of the change process, we decided like we need our teachers to really understand why this matters, as opposed to have it be this like other thing. We took our first ever faculty mission to Israel the summer before that trip. And I think we took like 25 people who'd never been there from every department, Jews, non-Jews. And it was like a truly, I think, transformational moment for the schools and our faculty's relationship with Israel. So that was hard. I lost a lot of sleep over that, but I feel really proud of that. And I will end by saying, as someone who has kids in the school, I have no expectation that that trip's going to stay the same either now. Because I think the most important thing is to not find ourselves stuck again and to realize like it's about the kind of core principles, to your point, Scott, and like the world is changing. And so these things are going to change, and helping everyone realize like, boy, there's lots of different ways to achieve the kind of same outcomes is really, really important. But that's my change story.
That's great. And one of the things, you're absolutely right. One of the things I've observed through 3 different heads of school and for being on the board for a long time is there's a constant sense of continuous improvement at the school. It's just this relentless focus on constantly improving, constantly getting better, constantly rethinking, and that's just part of the culture. So Dalia, Mark just talked about kind of hard decisions and hard moments, the challenges of leadership. Like what is like for you, like what's been one of the hardest moments of leadership for the past 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, this is another one where, there's not a lot of humor in the past 18 months, but, I think it's sort of interesting, some of the dilemmas that we faced. And I think a lot of them are ethical and bioethical dilemmas. And good news, we actually have 1,000-year-old tradition of ethics upon which we can draw. So I don't know what leaders right now without a framework do in terms of ethical decision making, because I'm sure happy that I have a really amazing, rich Jewish sort of guidance on how to make difficult decisions right now. I'm appreciating more than ever. I'll give you a very concrete example of difficult decisions related to COVID. So many of my stories, by the way, are about COVID because I've been at Gann now more of my time during COVID than not. So the biggest issue with running a high school right now is the out of school behavior of the students. So, we can keep everyone perfectly safe from Monday through Thursday, but the big danger is what people do on their own time. And every family and every child has sort of a different approach to safety. It's very Talmudic. There's glatt kosher COVID and there's kosher light. It's just, there's a lot of shades of gray. One rabbi says this, there's a machloket, which means a disagreement with another rabbi. It's very Talmudic. COVID is very Talmudic. You can find a loophole for every rule, especially when you're 16 and when you want to go see your friend. And so Gann has developed something called a brit, which means a social contract for our students and our parents and our faculty. We've asked everyone in our community to sign this, saying by going to school, the condition of us opening our schools that we're all agreeing to the glatt kosher version of COVID. But as you can imagine, things get hard, and kids are found on Instagram without a mask on, and so we hear about a party where kids were inside, and these are all rumors. And so I think the hardest thing the past year has been when I get a call from a parent and say, I feel really bad about having to call, and I don't even think I should be doing this, but I'm really nervous because I heard so-and-so was without a mask with this one. And that's a sort of contradicts our breed. And it's just sort of the worst thing for a high school administrator, because we don't like to get involved in sort of what happens on Saturday nights. That's sort of like our code, but we have to protect our community now. And so I think, like, what is Jewish tradition? Like, I always think, like, we have wisdom here upon which we can rely, right? And what's so interesting about these sorts of situations is you have this sort of Jewish, the notion that lashon hara, which is sort of rumors and evil tongue and slanderous behavior, is so bad. You don't want, I fear that in this time, our community could devolve into sort of, a rumor mill where people are telling on each other, and is so against the core of Jewish principles to engage in that kind of behavior. And that principle of lashon hara is in direct contradiction with the principle of pikuach nefesh, which means the protection of the life. And in Judaism, pikuach nefesh doche Shabbat, which means that even for the most halachic Jews, on Shabbat, they can break the laws of Shabbat. They can drive to a hospital if it means saving a life. So here we have two really important ideals in Judaism conflicting. When I get that call, what do I do as a leader? Do I interrogate what happened on a Saturday night? Do I engage in a rumor mill? But if it means that I'm protecting my community, do I have to do that? So I think those sorts of decisions where there are sort of really competing principles at play, and life or death, frankly, like sort of decision making, has been really hard. But I have to say, and I'm not just saying this because I'm the head of a Jewish school, thank goodness for the Jews and all the sort of Jewish heritage and the sort of Jewish thinking and the wisdom, because I'm relying on my own day school education and my own Jewish education in making these decisions. And I know that sounds like a poster plug for Jewish education, but I hope, God willing, our children will, when they become grown-ups, will never have to have another pandemic, but they will. And I tell this to our students all the time, you will experience hardship in your life. Like, there will be challenges. This is not the last one. Hopefully, God willing, this will not be something like this, but what do you do? And I'm very open with them. When they come into my office and I have to talk to them about something that wasn't the best choice, I present them with these competing principles, and I say, like, what do you do? Which of these principles is more important? And I sort of talk them through it. But when they face challenges in their life, I really hope, and I think they will, rely on their Jewish education and their understanding of Jewish ethics to help guide them in their decision making. So it's been really hard, but again, like, I'm so grateful to be in this community with this wisdom and this sort of sensibility and these sets of values to make these sorts of decisions.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got time for maybe a couple more questions. And a bunch have come in that I want to get to, because some of them are just, they're funny. So Mark, I've got a couple of questions here about, like, your most surprising or memorable experience from a Shabbaton. What do you got for me?
Okay. First of all, I'm just sorry. I just want to make sure everyone heard how extraordinary that answer was. Dalia, I cannot wait to read the article or maybe the book you write about that. I'm feeling really good about the fact that my kids are in this school right now. And if it's not clear to everybody, like, we are in a time of kind of national crisis of character. And, a lot of schools can teach our kids, certain knowledge, but the idea of how to apply that knowledge through the lens of ethics, let alone Jewish wisdom, is just amazing. So thank you for that. That was just amazing. Really inspiring. Okay. Shabbaton, 2, Scott. I'm going to do 2. One is actually before a Shabbaton. First of all, for those that don't know, maybe don't know, a Shabbaton is Gann's word for a 25-hour experience where it's kind of like a whole grade or some subset of the grade spend Shabbat together from Friday afternoon through Saturday night. And it's like a retreat to the rhythm of Shabbat. And obviously one of the things that's cool about this school is that there are kids on that experience who have maybe, like, never lit Shabbat candles in their life. Like, there's that's just not part of their family practice. They're very common. And other kids who might be like Orthodox, who beat to the rhythm of a very traditional Shabbat. And the coolest thing about Gann is, like, okay, you all figure it out. So one of my most memorable experiences was actually before we had an all-school Shabbat experience once. What we used to do, this is like very Gann, to your point, Dalia, about principles, is like, you guys have to figure out how to navigate this in a way that like maximally, like honors everyone's kind of practices. So the kids had a very public kind of discussion and debate about how to do Friday night services. And I'll never forget this moment where one kid got up and very passionately said, this was a more traditional child who grew up in a family that only prayed with a separation of boys and girls, okay? And by the way, like, I mean, I don't know, when I was growing up, I never knew someone that was that traditional. So like for a lot of people, again, have like never met someone that traditional. And one of the cool things about the school is like, wow, you're under one roof. So this child got up and said, I love you all. I have no judgment of any of you. You should practice however you do. But all I can say is, if we don't have a separation of boys and girls, I'm not participating. I can't. It's my family's practice. And I'm not going to justify it and argue with you and prove it from a text. It's how I do it in my family. And so it's totally fine, but I'm out. Like that was it. And then a girl or a boy, I don't remember, someone raised their hand and said, and went up next and said, here's the deal. I love you all. I don't care what you do, but in my family, if you separate boys and girls, it's like an affront to the image of God. And it's completely unethical and unegalitarian. And so I'm just saying, if we separate boys and girls, I'm not going to be there at all. So so you guys, it's fine, but I'm out. And then another kid got up and made an impassioned plea. We have to do this together. Like, this is about unity. And it was just so fun. I mean, I don't mean to make light of people's deeply held Jewish convictions, but watching teenagers with such passion kind of argue with one another about kind of the balance of community and individual and honoring each other's practices and yet finding ways to come together. Like that is like, to me, Gann at its best. It really doesn't matter. It's not really about the Shabbat, right? It's about kind of habits of mind and heart of learning to be in community with people who are different from you. By the way, that's not even just a Jewish thing. Like that's just what we need from our country right now. And it was just awesome. One of my most memorable experiences on a Shabbaton, I'll just share, was at the very end of a Shabbaton when the kids are usually exhausted and it's like, we're ready by then, and, it's like the energy's low and we always force them to come together and like, they think it's all over. Like they're like half out the door, like at the end of a class when they pack their backpacks, but it's the last ritual of Shabbat, which is called Havdalah and marking the end. And like, we try to make it meaningful, but sometimes it's like pulling teeth. And I remember one Shabbaton where we had kids lead it. And I think someone was playing a guitar and we did the ritual and someone after the ritual kind of sang a traditional song in a kind of upbeat way. And the next thing I knew, the kids were clapping and singing and dancing. My kids were there, by the way. I think I went to 40 Gann Shabbatonim over the course of a decade, and my kids, probably as little kids, like went to these, are on kids' shoulders. And I thought I had been transported to like another world because these tired, exhausted, probably high school juniors, which is like the most stressed out year, are dancing in a circle. And I think the teachers were kind of like, okay, like it's ready to go. We couldn't stop them from dancing. And it just like, I think it was a beautiful example. It was literally transcendent. I mean, it was the last thing most American high school kids are doing on a Saturday night. Let's put it that way. And these kids were like elevating in every way, connections to one another, connections to Shabbat, song, dance. Those moments, like, those are like moments that can get you through an entire school year.
Love it. Those personal kind of powerful experiences they're just so powerful and memorable. Dalia, I think maybe time for one question. So let me ask you, like, give us like your kind of most memorable, powerful Jewish experience, your memory, and kind of, can you kind of tie that to like a little bit of like your vision, where we're going, and kind of we can end on a forward-looking note?
Absolutely. And I'd love to not talk about COVID because I don't want to end talking about COVID. I want to talk about the future for Gann, which I think is very bright. Okay, I have two. I'll share them really briefly. One is and people have asked me sort of, how did you end up in Jewish education? I mean, you went to Schechter and Ramah, and now mid-career, you've switched into Jewish education. Sort of what brings you here into the Jewish world? And I've been thinking a lot about that, especially now that I'm here and at Gann. Two short little moments that I think are emblematic of good education, period, and also sort of where we are at Gann and what we can do and the possibilities. One is when I was a sort of in middle school, young teenager, I had the privilege to study with David Moss, who's a Jewish artist who created and sort of essentially illustrated and created and wrote the Mas Haggadah, which is a beautiful artifact and manuscript, original manuscript with paper cuts and meaning and metaphor, and it's an interpretation of the Passover story through art. And he was a visiting artist in residence at Ramah and Palmer, and I was a student there, and I was able to study intensely with him. I don't remember the exact details. And I learned so much. I'm not the most artistic person, but I learned so much about Passover and the text behind Passover and Pesach. And so much so that as an adult, as a Jewish adult in my small town right outside of DC, I led the local community family Seder for other Jewish families. I was so, without being a professional, without being a rabbi, or about being a, sort of a professional in the Jewish world, when I was sort of not in the Jewish world, I had so much understanding and deep affection and knowledge of the Pesach tradition because of that experience studying it with an artist, through the eyes of an artist. He was captivating. And so for me, that story is emblematic of sort of what we do at Gann, which is we have these really top-notch sort of, traditional secular, high school subjects in the arts and engineering and math and science and history. And we really ignite the passion that kids this age have around their interests. And we allow them to go really deep into areas of passion, which makes teenagers really happy, by the way, to have choice and to be able to explore their passion. But we also leverage that really deep immersive expertise within a Jewish framework. And so I think that Passover study of an artistic Haggadah is a good example of like what is possible at a school like Gann, because we're not sacrificing the general sort of traditional secular subjects, so to speak, or the quality of them. We're just in some ways illuminating literally our heritage in such a beautiful, meaningful way, so that we can, 20, 30 years down the road, it'd be great if our students become rabbis and become like Rabbi Baker. That would be a dream, halavai. But if they can just lead a community Seder in 20 years and love that Seder and do it with passion and creativity, that's our goal, right? That they have a smile on their face when they think of Passover and they know enough, right? Because you need literacy, know enough to lead it. So for me, that's really emblematic of sort of the vision here. Time for one more story. You want me to leave it at that?
Let's do one quick one.
Okay. Speaking of Israel, and we'll end here because speaking of change, we, as Rabbi Baker said, as Mark said, we have a great Israel program, but because of COVID, there'll be now 2 years of students who can't go on their Israel course. And so we're sort of in the process of rethinking this for next year and, reconfiguring it. So I've been thinking a lot today about international travel. And I don't know about the rest of you, all I want to do is travel now. It's like the perfect antidote to a Zoom meeting is to dream of travel. So I've been dreaming about international travel. So today I was telling a colleague about how when I was in college, I went on this group of Israeli teenagers or Israeli young adults to the former Soviet Union to work with Jewish communities in the former Soviet Union for I think it was an extended winter break experience. And, despite all of the sort of cultural gaps and sort of cultural differences sometimes between young Israelis, Jewish Israelis and Jewish Americans, we talk a lot about that again, because we're trying to make sure that we have a lot of understanding and appreciation for Israel. The experience of traveling with Jewish Israelis to lead Shabbat services for kids in Ukraine and in the former Soviet Union was one of the most powerful Jewish experiences of my life. And also, frankly, really solidified my connection to Israel, because it was in those moments in Ukraine and in Russia where I was able to really explore Jewish identity, and both Israelis and Americans we were on neutral ground, so I'll never forget that experience. And I think about that a lot in sort of how we're designing our Jewish identity conversations and courses and programs at Gann. But there's so much we can do here. This school is just literally amazing. And I'm really grateful to have the support and the wealth of expertise and just, talent and spirit of this community. So thank you.
That's great. That was fantastic. And I actually think we're at the bottom of the hour, and that's all we have time for, unfortunately. So before I hand this over to Ron Eichen for some final words, I want to thank first Dr. Hochman and Rabbi Baker for spending time with us, for sharing with us, for opening up, for giving us kind of the stories behind the stories, and for everything they've done to build and grow this incredible school. And I want to thank you all for your tremendous help during this. It's a challenging year. So whether it's been your volunteer time, your advocacy on behalf of the school, your financial commitment, we're just so appreciative for the support. So thank you all. And Ron, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much to Dalia, Mark, and Scott for a wonderful and insightful evening. What an evening. I hope my fellow Gann alumni parents agree that this sort of brings back the memories of the quality and experiences that our children and we had when our kids were at Gann. And I hope the Gann alumni parents, there are so many here tonight, will join us in some future activities. Now, we will keep the Zoom session open after the formal program. So if any of you want to stay and schmooze, feel free. And again, thank you all for coming tonight.